history of UFO sightings is not a long one, but it's a bit longer than most people suspect. To start to make sense of UFOs, you must go back 63 years. To the Second World War and these men, and what some of them saw in the night skies over Europe. Allied aircrews described strange glowing balls of light that tracked their aircraft, and even coined a name for them, Foo Fighters. This is one of the first recorded reports of a UFO sighting. It's taken from the official RAF archives, and it is highly unusual. It recounts the story of one pilot officer called B.C. Lumsden, who saw something extremely unusual during a bombing raid over Germany on the 7th of December 1942.
Was that light on Red 2?
We were cruising at 7,000 feet when we discovered we had company, an orange-coloured light off the port wing. At first I thought it was tracer flak, but discounted this when I saw how slowly and controlled it was moving.
What the hell is it?
It seemed to be playing with Red 2, diving around the fuselage. Suddenly it turned starboard and headed straight for us. I found it hard to make other members of the squadron believe me, but the following night one of the squadron flight commanders had a similar experience, with a green light.
It's gone! It's gone! It's gone!
A handful of Foo Fighter sightings could be dismissed as pilot error, but there were hundreds, if not thousands. Could they really just be the hallucinations of tired or terrified men? I've decided to find out more about these strange balls of fire. Military historians Dave Clark and Andy Roberts are leading experts on UFO sightings during the Second World War.
People were seeing tiny balls of light, not much bigger than a beach ball, say, to full-blown flying saucers in the style that we would appreciate today. And there's a problem of reporting them at debriefing, because if you had bomber crews landing and saying, you know, we saw these peculiar lights chasing us for miles and miles and miles, some of the bomber crews I've spoken to were fearful that they'd get grounded for lack of moral fibre, for inventing things to get them grounded, some form of psychological problem. First, the RAF and the Air Ministry were extremely concerned because they thought perhaps it was some form of German secret weapon. And it is known that the Nazis did have some quite novel varieties of anti-aircraft, such as Scarecrow and things of that nature, which threw huge metal bars around in the sky which people saw. And that was designed to unnerve people as much as to damage aeroplanes.
These designs, lifted from secret engineering blueprints seized by the Allies at the end of the war, show just how radical the Nazis' aerospace programs were. And it was plans like these that were unsettling the Allied forces. Going through American files of the kind of technological plunder operation that they did on Germany after the war, they do describe technologies that could be pieced together to develop a kind of Foo Fighter type weapon.
They were working on all these bizarre little things, but none of these things ever came to fruition. Had the war gone on much longer, or had the Germans won, then we may have seen these things develop in the same way that we saw the Americans develop space technology after the war.
The evidence for Foo Fighters is intriguing, but I wonder whether there is anything more than the log reports by the pilots who described screaming dogfights with strange balls of light. I've come to meet American technology historian John Derring. He has first-hand information on the development of Foo Fighters.
I interviewed a German aircraft engineer who had actually worked on these vehicles in the prototype stage and in the early phases of production. These were vehicles that were unmanned. They were what we would probably best describe today as unmanned aerial combat vehicles. These were vehicles that were not just sent up for surveillance purposes. They actually had a purpose of remotely controlled to engage the Allied aircraft, the bombers in particular, by basically trying to apply a mechanism that was not necessarily a catastrophic destructive effect, such as blowing the Foo Fighter up and taking the aircraft down. This was intended to be something that could be reused multiple times.
There's plenty of anecdotal evidence that Allied air crewmen saw these things over Germany, but what about hard evidence on the ground that this technology was actually pursued by the Germans?
One of the reports that I have seen and looked over was in reference to a project in the Black Forest that involved a small vehicle that was specifically intended to be an interceptor for advanced air defense against Allied bombers. Now that document actually came from a U.S. intelligence officer, and so I have pretty high certainty that that was